Good evening and welcome to Information Please, your Peoria Public Library on the air, bring you information about your library and your community. This evening my guest is Jenny Fulton, who is joining us from Peoria County, where she's in charge of emergency communications, or maybe it's just communications in general. Yes, sorry. Yeah, but we're going to talk about emergencies tonight. So Jenny is in charge of the Central Illinois Public Information Officers Group in addition, which I'm a member of as well. And so we wanted to tell the people of Central Illinois about that and about the great resources for when we do have our spring season with flooding and storms and tornadoes coming up. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I wanted to get you here before there's an emergency so people can be prepared. That's the biggest way to survive some of this stuff, is to know it's coming.
Right, and you never know when it's coming, so being prepared at any time is the best way to go.
Exactly. We just had so many strange emergencies, things like water main breaks that shut down the library, and then that shuts down our heating system, and you just don't know, and so you have to be prepared like every minute of every day, have your stuff ready and ready to go. But let's talk about our CIPIO committee a little bit.
Sure.
Tell me about the history of it.
Sure.
What is it?
So this is the Central Illinois Public Information Officers, and it's a group of public relations and communications professionals from the library, county government, local government agencies. We have health departments and hospitals and American Red Cross and Salvation Army represented. But basically we're responsible for making sure that important and accurate information gets out to the public during and after a disaster strikes, such as the Washington tornado.
Right, or even during the flooding, you did a lot of work. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's true.
Sorry, my TV's not working there. So what are some of the things that our committee does to prepare?
Well, our
to
committee
be able to
formed
help
in
the committee.
Sure, we formed in 2007, and like I said, our goal is to provide important and accurate information during disasters. And we serve a 5-county region: Peoria, Tazewell, Woodford, Marshall, and Stark counties. And we started off by creating a PIO response plan. How were our committee members going to respond during a disaster? We're not first responders. We're not saving lives. We don't have uniforms. We don't have badges. But we are an important part of emergency response and recovery, because we need to gather the information: what's happened, when it happened, how many people might be injured, how many, if there's fatalities, that type of information. Plus, what do people do now to stay safe and protect their families in the aftermath of the disaster? So we gather that information, we make sure it's the correct information, and then we get it out to the public. And one of the ways that we get it out, as you have on the board here, is our Central Illinois Emergency Information Facebook page, which is a great avenue because it connects us directly with the citizens that we're trying to reach. And you know, if we have information that comes in and we know it's accurate, we put it out there right away, and people can know that this is the information coming from the official source at the site of the disaster.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that's verified. It's not the rumors that you're seeing everywhere else. It is coming from closest to the source, so you can find it. And
That's
if
correct.
you can follow the page, but as we all know, Facebook has strange ways of sharing things. So my suggestion to people would be, and I'm sure yours too, if there is an emergency, search for the page and look at it and keep following it, because you could not, I mean, they say only like 10% of people who like a page actually get to see that show up in their feed automatically, but it's there. So if you don't know that trick to search for it and go to the page to see what we're posting, that would be the best bet at that time.
Yes, and then once you start engaging with the page, I think you'll see it more in your news feed. But we do recommend that people become fans now when there is no disaster, so that they're already tied in and tuned into the right source for information. And then when something happens and there's more activity on our page, as we're posting more often and we're engaging with the public more, then they'll see more of those posts coming through.
Yeah, and people ask all sorts of questions, and we can get those answers too.
That's correct, yes.
Well, you've done so much work, and the committee's helped a little, but I think your department has really done a great job on one of the things people don't understand, and this goes back to the controversy in Washington about not getting enough money, that FEMA has very strict rules about how you can get reimbursement, and one of those is following the entire FEMA plan, which is for everybody to work together and do things the same way. And you've done a great job of making sure that all of us are trained. We've all been to FEMA trainings. We know how it works. We know how to work with the other departments. We all carry around our information. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and kind of the things we've been trained in?
Absolutely. It really is a team effort. There's about 60 people on our committee, and I would say about half of those are really active on our committee. They get involved in local trainings and participating in exercises with other response agencies. But after 9/11, FEMA started to get into a system of managing disasters in a collaborative way, making sure that everybody was on the same page. And then this really hit home during Katrina, when the management of that incident, for lack of a better description, wasn't very organized. The Department of Homeland Security came up with a method for first response agencies, or any response agency, including public information officers, to follow a certain management system called the National Incident Management System. And this was really based off the wildfires out west, because they had this system in place. You have a chain of command, you have an organizational chart, you have a certain number of people reporting to their supervisor, you have supervisors not being responsible for too many people where things get a little bit out of hand. So it's very structured. And the federal government insisted that any person responding to a disaster have taken some of these trainings, the ones most appropriate for their role in disaster, so that we can all be on the same page and provide a coordinated response.
Yeah, speak the same language, know what people are expecting of you, knowing that, when you talk about the next incident management period and how it's going to work and what's going to happen.
Exactly. So the trainings for public information officers are not quite the same as the trainings for police officers and firefighters.
Right.
But there are trainings that we're required to take. If we're going to respond to a disaster, we have to take a minimum number of trainings. And so we make sure that all of our committee members take those trainings, because you never know if you're going to be called in to respond.
Yes.
If you haven't had the trainings, you
Then
can't respond.
You can't. You're
So we
not
make
even
sure-
allowed in.
That's right. We make sure everybody has been through those National Incident Management trainings.
And where we are going is the Joint Information Center. And we recently won an award for that system. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I appreciate you crediting me, but it really was, again, a team effort. Joint Information Center, again, this is part of the National Incident Management System. It's described. It's very systematic, but a Joint Information Center is the location that public information officers report to, where they can get the information funneled into. They collect. We actually have public information officers assigned to the scene. They're assigned to the Emergency Operations Center. They're assigned to media, and so we're kind of spread out. But the central communications hub is that Joint Information Center. We gather information from the public information officers in the field, and we vet that information and make sure, yes, this is the right information, and then we disseminate it from the Joint Information Center, which is also known as the JIC. So what our committee decided to do back in 2009 is, we know if a disaster strikes, such as Washington, we're going to have to open a Joint Information Center. This is a facility. It's a location. Ideally, it would have, right now, it would have Wi-Fi. It would have computers that we can use. It would have a printer and a copier and all that office equipment that you'd want to use if you're able to. But we didn't want to waste time after disaster strikes trying to find these locations, because I'm not familiar with Washington, so I'm not sure where the best location
or over
may be.
5 counties.
Exactly,
A lot of little
in the rural communities and things like that, we wouldn't really know where to start looking for a Joint Information Center after a disaster. So we started looking for them before a disaster. That way, if we identify locations throughout the 5-county region in advance and we have relationships with those facilities, we save a lot of time afterwards. We're not struggling to find a location. We know the location. We contact our people at that location, whether it's the director or the owner or a lot of them are churches, so if it's a pastor or a minister, we contact them and they open the facility up to our public information officers. Saves us a lot of time, and it helps us get that important information out more quickly. So what we've accomplished in about 18 months between 2009 and 2010 is actually securing over 100 Joint Information Centers in our 5-county region. And we're very well
pretty
covered.
Remarkable.
It is, because it took effort on our part for the public information officers, but it's quite a commitment, and we credit the businesses and the churches and the libraries and the other government agencies that have agreed to allow us to come into their facility 24/7. You never know when disaster strikes. So even if it strikes at 2 a.m., we have 3 or 4 people at each of these facilities that we can call, and they have keys and access, and they would head over and open the doors and allow us to come in
and start the work.
Exactly. Our goal is to have a joint information center up and operational and staffed with public information officers within 2 hours of disaster, regardless of the time of day or night that it occurs.
And that's pretty remarkable, and considering that it can be a challenge even to get to a site, and so to have that all in place is just enormous. But there was an award.
We've actually gotten recognized twice for this accomplishment. I would venture to guess that there are very few jurisdictions in the country that have pre-identified joint information centers to the extent our region is prepared and agreed to open their facilities. We have 100 in our region. So in 2010, we applied for and earned a National County Government Association's called NACO Achievement Award for our Joint Information Center program and establishing joint information centers in advance of a disaster. And then just recently, in fact, it was just announced last week on the 18th that the Central Illinois Public Information Officers are being recognized as a bright idea from the Harvard Kennedy School, which
that's exciting.
Very significant. So we're proud of that, and we're proud to have had such a group willing to go out and solicit these local businesses and churches and et cetera. But we're especially proud that so many, we really only reached out to about 130 locations.
Yeah.
And over 100 agreed. Yeah. So it's really a credit to those facilities that they're willing to help out.
Oh, yeah.
During disaster.
It is, because that's a scary thing to open your building in a time of chaos to complete strangers. Yeah, so
that's right.
Yeah. Well, we should get on to talking a little bit about helping the citizens, because the county has lots of information on preparing for disasters, and so of course the snow and the winter of 2014-2015, while it was very cold, we didn't have the massive amounts of snow that we did the year before that caused the flooding. And one of the next things we get, of course, is the rain. You get the spring sky with the rains and then all of that, and you've got this mess with the flooding.
Yes.
So, and this is actually the Peoria riverfront, and the committee helped with that too.
We did.
But
these are the floods of 2013 in April of that year, and there was a flash floods on, I think it was the 17th of April, and then about 5 days later the Illinois River flooded, which caused this damage that you see here. What we try to encourage people to do is, as we touched on briefly, is be prepared in advance of any type of disaster. And there's certain things that you can do that are really across the board. Doesn't matter what type of disaster strikes, but there are ways to be prepared. And one of the things that you want to do with your family before disaster strikes is come up with an emergency plan. So where do you go in certain types of disaster? If it's a tornado, obviously you go to the basement or a room in your house or wherever you may be that doesn't have windows and is closer to the ground than the 5th story of an office building.
And I think people are looking at that more closely even after Washington, where people were in a basement and it's still, things collapsed on them and all, but, identify where the right place in your basement is.
Yes, that's correct. And FEMA will emphasize that there's really 2 responses to a disaster. It's either evacuating, such as if your house flooded, you're probably going to leave your house, as many homeowners did in 2013, at least temporarily. Or if it's the fire, you're going to evacuate. But if it's a tornado, then you shelter in place. So evacuation and sheltering in place are really the 2 responses that you'll typically find in any type of disaster. So having plans for those. If you evacuate, where do you go to? Do you go right across the street, or is it bigger than that? Do you need to go further away? One thing that we recommend people do, again, on a personal level with your family, is identify points of contact. So if a tornado comes through during the school day and you have high school students in school, and maybe you have younger students at a daycare and you're at work and your spouse is at work and everybody's in a different location, how do you find out that everybody is safe and sound when the cell service might be interrupted, We did find out after the Washington tornado that while cell service may be interrupted, it might be difficult to make phone calls. Text messaging did work much better.
Yes.
So that's a route that people might keep in mind. If you can't reach somebody by phone, but you can text them, try that. So we suggest having a local point of contact, maybe a friend, maybe a neighbor people can check in with. But if it's a bigger disaster and they've been affected also, if it's a tornado and it's wiped out the neighborhood, then have an out-of-town point of contact that everybody can call in to check in with, say, I'm okay. So mom calls in, dad calls in, children call in, everybody calls in, and then when mom calls in, she can hear back that, yes, your son has called in and he's fine, and your husband's called in and he's fine. And everybody finds out that way. So we really encourage people to have those points of contact.
Okay, and I think it's probably wise too if you have kids in school to know what the school plan is, because they often have some sort of broadcast texting or emailing or something.
Yes.
And so it's really good to pay attention to that and be aware of it. Maybe you knew it at the beginning of the school year and it hasn't been used, and maybe this is a good time to review it.
Right, and I know that our schools are very good at practicing the plans that they have and trying to help those kids know how to respond during certain types of disasters. It may also be useful for the parents to find out what the school's plan is.
Yes.
Because, of course, any parent is their first concern is going to be their children, and are their children safe? And you can reassure yourself and know in advance what the school's plan is. If they evacuate, where do they go to? Where would you need to go to pick them up? And those type of things. Get yourself on a confidence level with the school in advance so that you can be reassured during the disaster.
And that's one of those things that it's so easy to put off and put off and put off.
Yeah.
And,
but it's
and
always
you
our
think,
first worry.
I'll do it tomorrow, and you never do it, and then boom, there you are, you're stuck.
That's right.
So in a disaster and a worry. And I will never forget the time my middle school student was sent out into a tornado because somebody pulled the fire alarm instead of the tornado siren, and the entire school evacuated out into the tornado, and then it had to all come back in soaking wet. So things go wrong, but you need to...
Things do go wrong, and that's why we encourage you develop your plan, and then when you have your plans in place, you practice those plans. So you can find out what might go wrong and then make adjustments to your plan. For example, if there's a fire in your home and your plan, if it's at night and everybody's upstairs sleeping or wherever the bedrooms may be, and your plan might be to escape out of a window in your room or one of your children's rooms. Have you opened the window recently? Is it painted over? Is it stuck?
Can you get out?
How are you going to get the screen out and all those things? So practice that in advance so that it's a fluid motion and you can get out quickly.
Yeah, and that's with kids too, because kids can panic, and you need to be able to. They need to be able to do that, be able to figure it out.
Right.
Well, I've got some pictures up here too of storm season. This is actually Prospect and War Memorial. Shortly before the Washington tornado, about maybe a month ahead of it, when that was a stormy season. Yeah. This, of course, is just a picture of a tornado. This is the old days. Maybe people didn't have quite as many electronics. A whole house tip over, but there's no wires hanging out of it. So, and this, of course, is Washington and the devastation. And to come out of your basement or to come home and see this, people, they freeze. They don't know where to start. They don't know what to do. And of course, that was what was left in Washington. And we're going to talk a little bit here pretty quickly about an emergency kit, but this is the kind of thing that can happen. This is actually my house, and my vehicle's wiped out by a tornado quite a while ago, 2003. But then you have the cleanup, and when you're an individual house hit by a tornado, you don't get that kind of response. We had friends and neighbors and, years of cleanup. So for the person who's in a rural area, you can have a tornado come down and hit your house and not hit anything else. Right. And it's not the same kind of thing you get when you have a whole neighborhood. So that's why we all be prepared to stand on your own. Be prepared for no help. That's right.
And actually, FEMA recommends that people are prepared with their supply kit to survive on their own for 72 hours after a disaster. Yeah. A lot of people, I think, have the misconception that the government's going to rush in and save you and pull you out of a basement if you're sheltering in place and those type of things. But if you look at Washington, that really, I think everybody's in agreement, could have been a lot worse, and thankfully it wasn't. Of course, it was devastating to those that were hit. But we have limited resources. Government agencies do have limited resources. So look back to Katrina, which was such a massive disaster. We need people to be able to have those plans and their preparedness efforts in place personally to take care of themselves, so that government agencies can take care of, hopefully, there aren't very many people that aren't prepared, but people that are more in need and maybe injured.
Injured people or people they can't get to. I mean, the governments have to do the big things like, you know, live power lines off the road, clear the roads so people can get through. I mean, in a disaster, you often can't even get an ambulance or a fire truck into where it needs to be because the rubble is so massive, and it can be shoulder high, it can be head high. It's just a nightmare. And so you have to think, what am I going to do if nobody comes? Nobody can come, nobody can get to me. Everything's gone, or nobody even knows I'm here or whatever. So you've got some items here.
Yeah. Now, I think it may be unlikely that you would be stranded for 72 hours, but it's not unlikely to be stranded for a day.
Right.
So we do recommend certain things to have in your supply kit. And to keep this kit, actually, we recommend having more than one. Keep a smaller version of a supply kit in your vehicle, and keep a larger version in your basement if you have a basement, or in the room of your house where you would shelter in place if you were having to do so. So of course we want to have water, and this is a handy little liter water container right here that can fit into your kit. Or you can get gallons.
5-year shelf life.
It does, yes. You can use gallon, jugs of water. You may want to replace those once a year or twice a year when you're replacing the batteries in your smoke detector and those type of things. But definitely you want to have water. And you can purchase supply kits already pre-made online and in stores and things like that. They may not be customized to your needs. For example, if you have people in your family who are on medication, then you want to make sure to have some medication set aside in the supply kit, or if you have an infant who's on formula and those type of things. So you really need to customize your supply kit. But in general, you want to have gloves, water, food supply, non-perishable food items. Of course, this is actually a radio. It looks like a camera, but it's a radio, and it's a battery-operated, it's a solar-powered or battery-operated radio.
The kind with the crank?
Yeah, I believe it may have a crank, but if it doesn't, you can use one with a crank. We recommend having a NOAA weather alert radio at any time, and we're headed right into severe weather season right now.
Yes, we are.
A utility, I say utility knife, but you'll need to shut off gas.
So you need something with a tool that look and see what you will need to shut things off, to shut off the gas.
And I would have no idea how to shut off gas at my house, so that's another thing.
Let's go home and do that.
That's right. That's another thing to test, to have in your plan that you want to take care of certain things in the aftermath, and one being to shut off the gas. How do you do that? So practice it. You can turn it back on.
Yeah.
Just practice it. Which brings me to, I attended a training one time, and a lady from the Red Cross was there, and she said she has her supply kit all put together with all the items that she believes she would need to get through the first few days. But one thing that she put in her kit on the top was a sheet of paper that listed the things that she would want to remember to do. Because if you're in a situation where you're in a tornado and your house is basically missing, you're not thinking and functioning like you normally would be.
No.
And you may be emotional, and it may be difficult to focus on the things that you need to do. So if you write those down and you have that sheet right there in your supply kit, and you pull it up, and it's a checklist of I need to do this and I need to do this, and that's a good idea.
Even remembering who you're supposed to call for that outside call point, you could forget. Yes. Oh, who did we finally decide on?
Right, and it's a good idea to keep that information where the whole family knows it, maybe on the refrigerator and other locations, also in vehicles would be handy.
Yeah.
And you can just have, this is a formal one, but it doesn't have to be formal, it can just be a notepad, where you would write your contacts, the phone numbers for them. Again, this is something you're going to want to check on every year or so, because numbers change and people move into different locations and things like that. So you want to try to keep it as updated as possible, but have those points of contact accessible where you can get to them when you need them.
Yeah, and I would say from my personal experience, adding things is when it gets to be storm season, our rule in our house is everything stays charged up all the time. The camera, because we needed photos for the insurance, and the camera battery was dead, and we had no power for days, and I had to rely on someone else who then never gave us the pictures. But it's also things like computers, or having one of the external chargers for flashlights, cell phones. Keep
Yeah.
your cell phone charged up. If the power goes out in your house, do you have a car charger you can charge your cell phone up? These were all things that, you know, that we learned. And so every year when it gets to be storm season, we just always make sure that, you know, computers, phones, everything stay as charged up as possible.
Right.
And all the batteries, and even if you think they're good, they might not be. And I would also say that people, and we ran into this in the Washington tornado, people who have medical equipment need to know what they do if your power goes out. If you have some sort of medical equipment, whether it's, you know, an oxygen tank, or whether it's, you know, even as simple as a CPAP machine, how are you going to power that? What are you going to do? And there's often, you know, batteries like marine batteries, that kind of thing, that can be adapted. Well worth investigating. The other thing is pets. Keep, even if it's just rope or an extra leash or something, so your house collapses, all your equipment for your pets, your horses, whatever you have something where if everything else blew away, you can corral them, and other people will even make up an emergency if your pet's missing. Already have missing pet pictures and flyers printed
Sure.
that can be copied. So those are just things I'd like to toss in from having been a tornado survivor and then having lived through a series of serious storms with no power and not being able to get out and about. But
Right.
this is the first part of a two-part show. We're going to be back next week, and we're going to talk about sheltering in place during different types of incidents, which is, of course, we've got always a new terrorist threat every day, and it keeps changing, and some of the things that FEMA has learned about the way people respond when we have all these wonderful plans, but what they really do.
Right.
So we'll just review. We're with the Central Illinois Public Information Officer Committee, which is part of, what's the region again? Region
Homeland Security, Region 10. Yeah.
Region 10. I always want to say 6, and I know that's not right. Yeah, Homeland Security, and a very active committee. And so we'll be right back next week with more information.